fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCOO 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Okay, welcome back into the House of Mystery, and I'm at the wheel, Al Warren. And today, co-hosting, we've got Mr. Ripper himself, Michael Hawley.
Hello. Yes, you betcha.
Hey, you were just doing a talk, weren't you?
Well, that, and also I think was what's even more intriguing is I did a book signing in New York, and one of the people that came up to my book and to me and started talking, she has this app of House of Mystery, and I was just shocked so I showed her our book. She goes, "Wow, you know him." So she was bragging about Al Warren to me in Buffalo, New York.
That's pretty
like,
funny.
I mean, how coincidental.
Yeah.
So
but she'd
really
never
intriguing.
heard you, so she avoids the shows you're on, obviously.
I guess.
I know. It's crazy. Oh, it's a small world. That's weird how
Right.
it does. I think, the internet's really, really amazing at reaching out to people. And like I said, in Chicago, there's a station that wants to pick us up. And I'm still trying to figure out my future.
Yeah. Well, your app is doing well, so.
Well, yeah. Something's doing well, hey? I don't know.
I think she's going to listen to Wendy tonight.
Oh, yeah. Well, here we go. We've got Wendy. We've got W.L. Hawkin on today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to come back and chat with you again.
Yeah.
And meet Michael.
You're in the middle of a storm.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. I think last time, it was Dave. Dave was on.
Yes.
Yeah. He's back, I think, tomorrow. So, yeah. No, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what's been going on with Wendy since you were on last?
Let's see. I think I was on with you when I had just released To Kill a King, which was book 4, and that was last March or April. I think you were the first actual show I did when I started with Mickey. Of course it did. No.
Oh, there you go. In Buffalo. Yeah.
In Buffalo, yeah. So since then I've been talking a lot about those 4 books that are in that series, and I've completed another book, which is a brand new series, which maybe we'll get to talk about next year. And it's coming out in February. Yeah. And now I'm just I've pulled out another draft that I'm working on for another mystery that's set on Vancouver Island. And so that's going to be up and coming too.
Do you ever wonder where these things come from for you? Like how you all of a sudden, now you're doing something out of Vancouver Island. Like, where does this all sort of, do you ever remember where it comes from? Like when you're just sitting somewhere or doing something else and bang, it comes to your head. Like, do you remember that time?
Yes, I do actually. And it depends on the book for sure. But, part of my thing is that I do a lot of travel. And just, for example, the one on Vancouver Island that I'm just working through the draft now, I was a lighthouse keeper for a year in 2013. And I was a teacher and I was all stressed out. So I joined the Coast Guard. Honestly, wow. I did. And I became a lighthouse keeper, a remote lighthouse keeper for a year. So they would send me out places where the lighthouse keeper needed to go off for a few weeks or whatever. And I'd pack up all my gear and I'd drive to Vancouver Island and grab a helicopter and they'd take me out and dump me off at a light station. And so with the one there, I was at Nootka, which is for anybody who knows Vancouver Island, it's north of Tofino. So kind of on the very, very west coast between Tofino and Cape Scott. And I was there for 8 weeks. And while I was there, it's such a historical place. It's one of the places where Captain Cook first landed and started, you know, the sea otter trade. And it's a really historical place. And it's the village of Yuquat, and the Muchlot and Moachot people are out there. It's also the end of the West Coast Trail, or the Nootka Trail comes down there, and the West Coast Trail comes up. So it's a very busy place. Anyway, one day I was out there and I was lying in bed. It was about 8 o'clock at night, because I was always there with another lighthouse keeper, and they would say to me, you don't have to do anything else as long as you do the morning shift. Because I always had night owl guys. So they'd be going to bed at 4 a.m. while I was getting up to go to work. Right. Yeah. So I'm lying in bed trying to go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. And I had just read all of this stuff about these massacres that had happened on the island and all the people that had died there. And my bed started to move, and it was actually shaking from side to side. And so I kind of put my hands out and I held onto the bed, and it was shaking, and I got up and I looked at the bed and I looked around the room and I said, okay, stop it, you guys. Because I was sure the spirits were doing it. Honestly, I really was. And I'm like, stop it. That's enough. And then I heard this voice in the other room say, yeah, this is Cape Scott. We just had like earthquake here of 6 on the Richter scale. And I went, oh.
That's a lot of energy there.
It was actually a natural occurrence, not a supernatural occurrence. But that moment, I thought, I have to set something here. And so there's a paranormal mystery happening there. Yeah.
Oh. Well, that's interesting. When you're in areas like that too, I guess you really absorb a lot of the, the energy of the people and the place. And everything like that really must get into your writing.
It does, because part of my thing is I have to go and touch everything and stand where the characters stand, and I want to feel it. And so with this one, To Sleep with Stones, which is book 2, I guess a couple of things inspired that. And one is that I wanted to have an artifact, because I have an archaeologist as one of the protagonists in this story. And those great stories where there's, this fancy artifact and something happens with the artifact. So I had read a book by Lorraine Evans, and she talked about how around 1350 BC, the Egyptians are actually Mary Totten, who is the daughter of Nefertiti, an Akhenaten, okay, from that realm. Right. She had gone to Scotland. And so I thought, okay. So I created an artifact based on that she left there and that my archaeologist finds. And that kind of is part of the inspiration for this, where the artifact gets stolen. And at the same time, a young man who is from my witch coven is working over there with her as an archaeologist. And they've been out celebrating finding this artifact. And while he was out celebrating, he got himself in a kind of a compromising situation in a beer garden with the archaeologist. If you can get my drift. Anyway, and there was a very nasty Glasgow journalist there who took pictures of him. And so he got into a fight with this guy. And then the next morning, while Dylan is out sleeping with the Stones, doing his witchy thing, the police find this journalist's body in a cairn in the next field to where he's sleeping. And there's enough evidence there that they pull him in for murder. And so he gets charged with the murder. So it is a murder mystery. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So maybe if people haven't heard you before, or what is the Holy Stone Mysteries about? This is book 2 we're talking about. You've been on for 4, so maybe give an overview of what it is.
Sure. Yeah, the Holy Stone Mysteries basically started as a coven of witches that live in Vancouver, and they kind of solve murders. They're involved with that kind of thing, and they use ritual magic. They're like regular people who go out in the woods and do rituals, but their powers have grown a little bit. But they're not like charmed witches or anything like that, right? They're kind of regular people, but they do have some interesting folks they meet along the way, like fairies and vampires and gods and things like that. So it's urban fantasy in a way, but it's also murder mystery.
So urban fantasy is really kind of it's kind of like a modern day reality, but there's a fantasy sideline to it.
Exactly, which is why I like it so much, because it really works. You can work a lot of mythic realms into it. And so they are regular people who can do fantastical things. And it's contemporary, but depending on what's happening, they might end up like in book 4 where they time traveled. So there's lots of freedom with it.
Yeah. I just wonder, because there's so much literature and movies and things out there centered on vampires. Mm-hmm. and vampires' relationships, and sometimes werewolves are involved, and you know how it goes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard for me to keep track of which is which, and I mean this in a sense of people seem to create their own rules. How do you decide? Well, no, but I mean, like you take a vampire and the original, and you move it all the way up, and all of a sudden sunlight doesn't hurt them, or crosses don't matter, and all these things. There's all these different, I don't know, rules, I guess is the best way I can say it. Or how do you decide what kind of rules you're going to set on your vampires?
That's a good question. There are I think they're tropes, like that's maybe the term. I don't know, but I do have vampires in this book. So this book has a dual storyline. So while my one character, who Estrada has been, he's from To Charm a Killer, and the series kind of revolves around him running around saving people. And while he goes off to Scotland to help his friend who's been put in jail, his lover, Michael, who is in Vancouver, gets upset and melancholy and takes up with a young French model who looks like a younger version of Estrada. And as it turns out, this young fella is actually connected to vampires. And how I did it was I wanted to take it into a more scientific way. So my vampires have more of it's a virus. Hate to even use that word these days, but I wrote this long before we had that virus. And it is a virus that they can get and they can inject, so it goes through the bloodstream. And so I made the rules around that. Yeah.
The covamp virus.
Yeah. So it's fun. I mean, you play with it in a long way, but it's pretty serious too when you get into it. The third book is really, the whole book is about the vampires, but they get introduced in this book.
Well, and so, but when you get to these vampires, do you just pick up rules that have been set? Like, does sunlight bother them, and does the Christian cross, or does a stake through the heart kill them and stuff like that? Or you just walk away from that and start from scratch yourself?
I kind of start from scratch, but I also speak to those things. So, and it's kind of fun to turn those things on their heads and say, none of that stuff actually is true, except the part where we're really fast, or except for the part where we like to drink wine, or we really like to have sex or whatever it is, right?
I wonder if that makes it more for the reader. It kind of allows them to accept it as almost reality, because you're almost saying, well, that's not real stuff, but this is real stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And it makes it fresh. I think you have to kind of make it fresh as much as you can. In fact, one of my beta readers said to me, you know, what's going to make your vampire special? Why would I care? That was a really good question. So I had to actually say, okay, what am I going to do about this? So I did huge backstories for all of these vampires, which was fun. And in the third book, the stories come out quite a bit.
Oh, all the deep stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All the tragic.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you describe Dylan McBride then as a character? So someone outside that hasn't read any of the books yet,
right?
What would you say about Dylan?
Well, the second chapter is called A Fresh Sweet Peach. If that gives you any kind of idea, he is quite innocent. At least he presents to be quite innocent. He's younger. He's 19, 20, younger than the other people in the coven, and really has not had, you know, a lot of experiences yet. So when he gets with, when this archaeologist who's quite, what can I say about Sorsha? Sorsha's an Irish girl, and she basically takes what she wants. And so when Sorsha kind of hits on him, he doesn't know what to do. So we see him in that way. And then he gets sent into Greenock prison, which is one of the most, you know, horrible prisons in the UK. So it's really difficult. But we get a lot of his backstory in this, because I wanted this to be his book, but he really is an innocent. It's almost a coming of age kind of a story for him. Yeah.
So how did you tie all this in? Like, how do you get Egypt and everything all mixed in? Like, it seems like they're quite far out. It doesn't seem like it wouldn't come to my mind, but that doesn't say a lot either. But I'm just saying that. So how do you pull all this together and decide what would fit?
Well, I did a ton of research. Actually, this morning, I dug up my file on To Sleep with Stones, because I was in Scotland in 2009. So that's kind of how far back it goes for me when I went and walked there, because I went and stood in Argyll and touched the stones that he sleeps with. And I went to all these places, and I really needed to feel the energy of these places. And I went to his town where he lived, this little village called Tarbert, where he lived with his grandfather when he was growing up. I did a lot of photography there. I actually took a picture of a man that I was sure was his grandfather standing, looking out over the harbor. Yeah. And so once I kind of have all of that, and then I have all the mythic stuff, I do all the backstory on everything. And then I just sort of sit down and say, okay, what happens? With the Egypt stuff, it wasn't too hard, because I have an archaeologist in a bar talking to Estrada, and she basically explains it to him. So it's not, you know, it's not too hard.
No, but it just seems, for me anyway, I just think that's quite creative in a sense, to all of a sudden have a character in there that's bringing up a subject like Egypt and artifacts and stuff, and just all of a sudden incorporated into the story. Maybe that's because I'm, you know, a nonfiction guy, so I wait. I'm told what to do.
That's right,
so to speak.
You know, Alan, I think you have to give fiction a try one day and just see what happens.
Well, I've touched off on that in the last two books. I've got a little bit of historical fiction going on, so I'm kind of going there a little bit, but you know, it's hard to say. I guess I have to have more confidence in writing about subjects that I'm not directed on, if that makes sense. You know? Because you have to really step out, like when you're, and you're relying on yourself. So when you're writing all of these characters, there has to be a lot of you that goes into each of these characters as well. It's not just a total creation, right?
I suppose. I mean, I really rely on my muses a lot, and I, you know, But what, I think what I mean is like when you're relying on that and you're getting information about how you're going to do a character, you still express it through your own hand, your mind. So when the character does something or is going to do something and has a certain feeling and a certain look, it's still on the direction of your own person as well. You know, it still comes from you. Like I know that I hear that. I hear I hear people say that, and I hear other authors saying that it comes from me. I don't know if it always comes from me, honestly. I do think it could come from other places through me sometimes. But
you filter it.
I filter it for sure. Yeah.
And that in itself can tweak your people somewhat too, right? Like if you're getting that this character is going to do something and you really don't like it, does it still happen?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. Well.
Oh yeah. No, they run the show. I don't ever say, no, you can't do that. No.
Well, you got to put your foot down once in a while.
No, I don't. I really, I've done,
Yeah.
6 books, I guess now, like where I just kind of let them go. I mean, I get a lot of inspiration from different places that, like, where I go. For example, when I went to Tarbert, and I stayed at a B&B there, and it's a little kind of a fishing town with a cove and these really old brick fishing cottages, kind of a thing. And the folks there, are pretty traditional Scots, right? Scotland is really conservative,
right?
In a lot of ways. That's what I came away with, at least in 2009. And one of the things I heard there was the proprietor of our B&B was telling me this story once, and he said, there was a writer here that used to live in Tarbert, and he used to, I won't say the name or anything, but he said he used to dress up like a woman every Halloween in high heels and everything. And I think he had a store or something too. And we all thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, he looks good as a woman or whatever. Right. And he says, and then he disappeared and he was gone for quite a long time. And then he came back and he was a woman, and he had changed his name, and he told us all that his name was now this. And he said, oh, and I didn't know what to do. Now, this is an older fella, right? That I was talking to. And he says, and I used to go into the store, and I would always put my foot in it. I was just gobsmacked, and I would always say the wrong thing. And, they did not know how to deal with that. And for me, that story was huge. I just went, what would it be like for someone growing up in a little town like this, if they were transgender, if they were gay, if they were transgender? And where I ended up at the end of this book, and I did not do this on purpose. I wrote the whole book, and at the end of it, I went, oh my gosh, because as I was saying to you, at least 4 or 5 of the characters are really, really affected by homophobia in this book. And that was my impression when I was in Scotland, was that there was quite a bit of homophobia going on there, at least in the small outward places. I'm sure Edinburgh and everything is not like that, but
yeah.
So is the backdrop Scotland then, or is it British Columbia? Okay.
No, they're in Scotland for this, pretty much this whole, well, okay. The guys are in Scotland, and the vampire thing is happening in British Columbia. So there's like 2 things going on. Yeah. Yeah. So the murder takes place in Scotland. My lead character goes to Scotland to help get his friend out of jail and to solve the murder. And so they're solving the murder in Scotland. And then this other side thing is happening out in BC with his lover and the vampires.
And Michael was that author that went to that town in Scotland and dressed up as a woman.
Was that you, Michael?
I guess so. Yeah.
Interesting for me because all of these stories, you know, it's all affected by that, right? And it happens right from the get-go when Estrada, like my lead character, is bisexual, and when he gets off the plane in Scotland, like right from the get-go, when he gets to immigration, he starts getting kind of like that harassed kind of a thing going on, and he's like, what? They got some kind of file on me, and it just kind of goes from there. So, and I did not intend that at all.
Well, how does that affect you, but as a writer, like when you're going through this and you're kind of transcribing or you're writing the story that comes to you, and then you go to Scotland, you're doing all of these things because you're really involved and it's important to you, I guess, in the book. How does that kind of go with you? How do you feel about it, like when you're doing it?
Oh, I'm totally into it. I mean, I'm like when I'm writing, especially these books, because they have so many tentacles out there in different directions, I'm like living it, basically. Yeah.
Wow.
I can't be like, I'm going to write for 2 hours today and then I'm going to go and do something else. It's like it's in my head all the time.
So Wendy, I do both fiction and nonfiction, and I know what you're talking about. The nonfiction is I have a passion for research and discovery, but then the fiction you're creating a world, but you're also doing research, and you were making a comment about your research. So you still actually kind of, you have to be correct. I mean, historically, you have to be correct. Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, I did a lot of research for this one, and that's what I said. I was just looking through my file at all even the mythical stuff that I was looking at there, because I don't know if you're familiar at all with Robert Graves' work, the White Goddess work. Did you ever run into him anywhere? He's a poet.
No.
Okay. He's a UK poet, and he wrote quite a work called The White Goddess, which is like, I don't even know how to describe it. But he talks about the Celtic years, the months of the year, the battle of the trees, how they name their months. So I had read this whole thing about the Celtic, and that's flowing through this book as well. So in this book, Estrada at one point, because things are going really badly for Dylan in prison, and Estrada knows they will go bad for Dylan in prison, and that is why he says, I can't leave him there. I have to get him out of there, because he knows that Dylan will rather die before he lets anything bad happen to him. And so it's really serious. And so Dylan says, you have to do something, and you have to do it now. So he says, you have to go to this nature reserve called Tainish, and you have to find a branch from an oak tree, and you have to appeal to the Oak King, and you have to help me. And so Estrada does this. He goes out and he does a big ritual, and they conjure the Oak King, and they also conjure Cernunnos, who is the horned god, the antlered god. You've seen him, the green man, kind of guy with the antlers. They conjure him, and Estrada's been playing this for a long time in the Coven. Like, they do a lot of theatrical rituals, and he's always thought, they're the same guy. But then he's out in the middle of the field with these standing stones, and these two different things appear. And he's like, wow, they're not the same at all. And so that was a whole other piece for me too. adding all of that mythology to it, and yeah, getting to know.
Wendy, it's so funny that I have this yellow book in front of me. A friend of mine gave it to me about 6 months ago called The White Goddess, Robert Graves. When you said that, I got to find it. And so I have the book, but I just haven't touched it yet.
It's really hard reading. Okay. I mean, you have to kind of suspend belief, but it's also like almost a text, you know, it's different, but a lot of the poets the poets from the 60s, Gwendolyn McEwen and all of those poets from way back, they were really into the White Goddess. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if whoever gave that to you had something in mind. Were they trying to say something?
Yeah. Well, actually, because part of my fiction novel was going into the Celtic world myself, so that's what he gave this to me for.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Wow, you guys are so far ahead of me. I don't know.
Well, my last name is Hawley, but it was actually Holly, Holly, and so that has a Celtic background.
Sure. Well, my coven is Holly Stone, so yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's Holly's Rock. That's what that means, Holly Stone. You're the
Al.
That you like that Al, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, wow, that's interesting. So now, at the end of the day, so when you get through these 4 books in the series, are you going to continue this on?
Yes, probably. I mean, I think I have to, because I do. There are still some unanswered questions for Estrada. And I'm really into those characters, but I had to tell him to back off for a bit because I wanted to finish these other 2 books that I kept putting on hold. And so I'm like, just let me do this.
Yeah, but then the answers that need answering, the questions that need answering, I was going to say, do you know those answers now, or like, is this all kind of predetermined in your mind? You kind of know where it's all going to go, and you know how it's going to end, and all that, or so it's just happening as you go to do it.
Yeah, no, I am an intuitive writer, so when I start, I have no idea where I'm going. I just say what happens now, and I just go with it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So at the end of To Kill a King, which is the 4th book, there is, I mean, that book is closed up, but then just at the last moment there is, Cernunnos is involved, and he's the crazy god. So he's the one that gets them time traveling, and he can do anything. So he leaves Estrada with a big cliffhanger. And, yeah.
J.K. Rowling is the opposite. She kind of had everything all formatted, mapped to everything.
Yeah, well, I can't do that. Yeah.
Me neither.
I can't do it. It's just, it doesn't suit my way of working, I guess.
Yeah. Do you find it hard to remember things from the earlier parts? Like, let's say book 1 and 2 when you're going through book 4, and if you're going to go to book 5 later, is that even an issue for you, or do you just pick up and go?
I can pretty much pick up and go. I mean, you have to remember, well, you guys know this. I've read To Charm a Killer, which is book 1, about 200 times. So it's because of the editing, because of all the times that you do it. And so I've read them, all of those books, many, many times. And so I know what goes on. And at the end of a book, I always sit down and I go, okay, what do I know at the end of this book? So these things happened. And I actually found a list today in my file. What do I know at the end of To Sleep with Stones? And I had jotted down all of this stuff. And so then if I come back to it, I know what the major things have happened. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like a serial. Somebody said to me, this isn't so much a series as a serial, because I'm following this group of characters, but mostly I'm following Estrada, right through over several years, and I pick it up, I drop him off and then I pick him up 6 months later, or I pick him up a year later. And so we've really followed his journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what do you hope people get out of this when they read the books? Is there some sort of message, or do you have like a?
No,
is it just entertainment?
It's fun. I mean, really, I have so much fun when I'm writing, and I just hope that people have as much fun as I do. I mean, I hope they really enjoy it. But I got to tell you, the other day, what was I doing it for? I'm trying to think of the reason I did it. I don't know. Anyways, I was looking at reviews.
Oh.
And I went back and I looked at all my old reviews, and I made, I copy pasted them onto a Word document, and I was reading them and I was like, wow, this is what writers need to do. So if you're feeling down about your work, you really need to go back and look at Amazon and Goodreads and wherever it is you're getting reviews and see what people say, because it's just, I felt so good after that.
Even the 1 stars?
Honestly, there weren't any 1 stars. So
that's good. That's
yeah,
good.
No, they were good, and they were just really great. And just seeing the kinds of things people say, it just made me feel so good. I'm like, yeah, I love this. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll recommend some of my 1 stars to go over. Just saying, hey, there's another really good book you're going to like. Come on.
I'm just curious, because nonfiction, if someone does not like, for example, the suspect that I researched, if someone just is dead set against it just for any reason, they're going to pop a 1 star on me in a heartbeat.
Yeah. 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 It's different, because you're claiming, okay, this Tumblety guy is really Jack the Ripper, and this is why. So that's what you kind of put out in your book. So if someone comes along and they go, no, he wasn't it. That's crazy. It's Joe Blow. So then they automatically just give you a 1 star because you don't know what you're talking about. They don't care about the research you do have. They don't care about the way you wrote it or anything like that. They're just caring about the end result, like how it ends. You see, and I guess in fiction, so for Wendy, it would have to be like if they read the book and then something happens to the character that they didn't want, like you kill off a character and they really love them, then they might give you a less of a rating because you killed their favorite person.
Maybe.
Maybe. I'm just saying that might be kind of an equivalent, because I know what you're saying. If people don't believe in what your subject on the case was, like what your thoughts were on, let's say, Jack the Ripper, then they think, okay, well, you're a nutball here, 0,
Well, there was a case where there was a fiction novel. It was stalking Jack the Ripper, and I was asked to do a book review, and it bothered me because the facts were wrong. The Catherine Eddowes was not in Scotland Yard jurisdiction. It was a different one. So, but of course, the author was not an expert. They were just writing a fiction novel, and it was so difficult for me to get around that.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I mean, if you know what the fact is, or what some of the truth is, but for an outside reader, they might not. Right. So,
and that's why I was asking Wendy about the research she was doing, because that's where I could see where someone might not like it if you didn't get your research correct.
Yeah. Mike's dog doesn't agree with them.
Yes, sorry about that. That's why I'm on mute a lot.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't know, I don't know how credible Lorraine Evans is with her book. But I used it, and so far nobody said anything. I'm just going to see her. They will now after this. I know. Yeah. Her book is called Kingdom of the Ark, the startling story of how the ancient British race is descended from the pharaohs. Okay, that's probably going to get a few people going.
Right.
But I actually just used the one little bit of it where she said, it was a possibility that Meritaten was in Scotland. And it was a possibility because, they were sailing up to get tin from the UK all the way up to Skara Brae in those, in the Bronze Age. So it's possible.
Right.
that lots of people were up there. And, you have all those Neolithic sites up there and the standing stones. So, yeah.
Well, and plus you're writing a story in fiction, so you should be able to get away with it, so to speak.
You have some leeway.
Yeah. Now, did you go to a Scotland prison to see what it was like too, or?
I did not. I really don't like prisons a whole lot.
I don't know why.
I did go on their website though, because I had to think about things like what are visiting hours like, because I have Estrada go visit him, and then I'm not sure even about if they're what it's like to sit there, like if you're in a table or if you're behind glass, or what that's like.
Right.
But I know that it's a notorious prison. It's a very difficult one. They had the Lockerbie bomber in there. I mean, they have they have maximum security guys in there with the innocent guys, innocent in quotation marks. So it's difficult, and just even telling Dylan's story from the perspective of, well, at the beginning of the book, he gets arrested and he's pretty much in prison for the whole book. And so he's telling his point of view of what's happening for him at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a whole different energy in a prison, right? So it's an odd feeling. I mean, and And then I had a young woman that I was corresponding with who was in Gilpid. She was an archives person because I needed to get all of the legal stuff, right?
Right.
So, if you get charged with murder, what's that like? How does the court system work for you there? Where would he be staying? What would they do with him? And she was great. So she would just go, I would email her, and then she would go out and find a police officer and ask him my questions, because it's a really small town. And then she would get all the answers and come back and email me with the answers. She was great.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great to have that kind of inside source.
Yeah.
So let's talk about finding Wendy. So how do you like people to find you and react? Or do you have a book called Finding? No, I don't. But do you have a book how do you like a website, or how do you like people to come in and interact with you?
I do. I'm Blue Haven Press. That's my website. So it's bluehavenpress.com. Perfect. And everything is pretty much on there. And then I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those places. But you can find all of that through my website. It's probably the easiest way.
Right. Of course, we'll have that up on ours as well, so that people can find you and everything else. So, so what next? Where are you going to after this series?
Well, next I'm working on this, the Lure River Romances, which is romantic suspense. And it's actually set in Minnesota. So, yeah.
So have you been to Minnesota?
I have been. Like I said, I don't write about anywhere I haven't been through. Or I haven't gone at some point. But the funny thing about that book is that there's a little story. It's on my website, so I'm not really giving too much away. This book is the first one in the Lure River Romances, and I wrote it 30 years ago. I wrote the first draft when I was leaving my ex-husband and starting my degree in Indigenous Studies at Trent University in Ontario. And so I'd written this book and wrapped it all up in brown paper, because how we used to copyright stuff, we would mail it to ourselves.
Right.
And so a couple of years ago, I was going through all my boxes and I found it, and it's like, oh, I think I'll open this and read it. And I did. And I was like, wow, this is a romance. That's really interesting. So I started writing it based on what it was. I used the same characters pretty much. And then not too far into it, the woman found the bones of she found bones basically in her shed. She's living on the Chippewa Reservation in Minnesota, and renting a place for the summer. And she finds basically a skeleton in her shed, and it turns out to be the bones of a missing Indigenous girl. And so it took off in a whole other direction. And I ended up telling that young girl's story along with the story that was going on.
Yeah, there's been a lot about that with the Indigenous lately, especially with Canada. And I guess the Pope is coming to Canada now, hey, to speak with them.
Well,
or they're going to him, aren't they? Well, I can't remember now.
Well, I just saw some headline this morning about the records from residential schools have been sent to Rome.
Yeah.
So it might have something to do with that. But I mean, I think it's about time some big apologies happened, and that's what, the reconciliation is about,
Well, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
More than apologies, really. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. It's terrible. Well, hopefully I don't know. We'll see. But apparently he's involved now, so he's going to do or say something. So I guess that's a good thing. Yeah. Well, so it sounds interesting. Again, it's been a pleasure. And of course, the book we're talking about is Sleep with Stones. It's book 2 of the Holly Stone Mysteries. And our guest is the author, W.L. Hawkin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Al, and thank you, Michael.
Yeah, nice speaking with you.
You too.
Get the latest news and opinions from Eric Shapiro from the House of Mystery website in the Shapiro Report.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.